And thank you for that reading. As I was listening to the song "The Road Home" and "Peace Be Still," it reminded me of several things. As many of you know, not only am I a neurosurgeon, I'm a neuroscientist, and so one of the things I wanted to talk about was compassion and self-compassion. And I think what's so hard for so many people is to be kind to yourself. And we struggle with that. And I don't know, frankly, what age you ever get over that. But what you can do is to be comfortable with yourself. In the face of negative self-talk, what I was taught by Ruth was a technique to accept myself and understand that those negative narratives are not real. They're oftentimes a response that we have to negative events because from an evolutionary perspective, we turn toward negativity because that's what protects us. If everything's perfect, you don't need to worry about anything. It's the things that threaten us. But unfortunately, for many of us, that translates into us being critical of ourselves, saying, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not worthy. And certainly as a child, that plagued me quite a bit. And but what she taught me was to give myself freely self-affirmation and understand that no matter how much we criticize ourselves, first, it's not true. Second, that we're really frail, fragile human beings, and most of us are just doing the best we can. And third is that you deserve love. And when you're able to do that, magic happens. And that magic is that you're able to see the world through a different lens. Because what you recognize is, when you're so focused on your own suffering, in some ways it's egotistical and it's narcissistic because it's me, me, me. But if you're able to see beyond that, you understand that everyone is suffering and everyone deserves compassion. And it's when you're able to see that we are all one, then you suddenly become calm within yourself. And you were saying, peace be still. Remain a challenge. It continues to be my challenge. But sometimes we get so lost in our thoughts that we don't pay attention anymore. But when you have this self-awareness, I have a tendency to sort of go off in these different directions. It allows you to have sort of what we call a metacognition, where you see how you're thinking. And then that allows you, hopefully, to be unbiased. I've had the joy, the honor, and the pleasure to meet and become friends with many of the leading spiritual and religious leaders in this world. And whether that's the Pope, whether that was Thich Nhat Hanh, whether that was Desmond Tutu, or Amma, the hugging saint, or Radhanath Swami, or Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, or Sadhguru, or Eckhart Tolle, or Byron Katie. I've had the joy of spending so much time with these individuals. It was said I was an atheist. And, what I mean by that is the only thing I know is that the only thing we have is this present moment. That's it. I can't predict the future, and I haven't yet seen anyone who can. So that's what I try to be centered there and understand that if you are in the present moment, that's where everything happens. That's how we connect. The problem for so many of us is, what are we doing? One is we're regretting the past, what should have been, could have been, might have been. And the other is an attachment to a future that yet exists and of which we have no control over. And so the key is to be here and now. The other challenge, I think, also is that many of us set a goal we want to accomplish, and that's wonderful. But the challenge is that when you only focus on the goal, you miss the most important aspect, which is the journey. And again, that comes down to being present throughout, not only looking at the end point. And the problem is that if your focus is the end point, then that means you have craving and attachment. And that's where all suffering comes from. And so there's nothing wrong with having goals or setting that as a destination, but life doesn't always work the way we want. And if it doesn't work out, again, then you have a tendency to beat yourself up. And it's this understanding that if you're focused on that, it's wonderful, but the most important aspect is all the interactions you have on that journey. And that's what makes us human. It's the recognition that others are suffering. It's willing to step out, care for another person. It's a willingness to take a detour if that's what's necessary, because that's our lives. That's where we live. It's not anticipating or connecting to or wanting so desperately the goal at the end. And in some ways, this is about the song, The Road Home. If you think about that road, it's a road that has many paths into it that all lead to the same place if we keep our eyes open. Unfortunately, there are some groups that have a tendency to believe their way is the only way. And because people have used religion as a divider, a separator, or a way to show their superiority to others. And, there's a great quote, if your religion requires you to hate others, you need to find a new religion. And really, that's fundamentally true. What is at the depth, I think, of all religions, and do many of you know Karen Armstrong? Or I will tell you, she likes to be called Karen, as she informed me. But she's written a great deal about religion. She's a former nun, and she's an incredible author. And she won the TED Prize in 2008. And what she did was she got 19 spiritual and religious leaders together to examine what is the basis of every religion. And shockingly, it was compassion and the golden rule. And John was kind enough to mention these compassion beads, and I'll tell you an interesting story about that. So after the book was published, I received an email from a woman, and she said, I'm a person of faith. I'm the spiritual director at the largest homeless shelter in the United States. And she said, I read your book, and it was so powerful to me because at the time I read it, I had been overwhelmed at work. I had actually resigned. My friends had sent me scriptures, and nothing had an impact. And a friend gave me your book. And she said, that book gave me the strength to return to work, which is like incredibly moving. So I'm sure it shocks you that her and I became friends. And actually, I ended up going, and this was the homeless shelters in San Antonio. I ended up visiting the homeless shelter and touring the homeless shelter. And again, shockingly, I gave a sermon in the church. And it was wonderful. So then what happened is she sent me an email later, and she said, I shared her story and how powerful it was with my best friend, and she has a daughter, and her daughter makes beads. And her daughter was, I think, 12 at the time. And she said on her own, she came up with these compassion beads, which are 12 wooden beads, each representing one of the letters of your mnemonic. And she also added a golden bead to represent the golden rule. And she said, would you mind if we sold these to support the homeless shelter and our peace initiative? Well, no, damn it. So I said, of course, yes. And so she started selling these. And then a little while later, she sent me another email. And she said, this has been so moving to me. I got that little girl, her name was Jenny, and we did a videotape together. And would you mind if we posted it? And she sent it to me, and you can find it on YouTube under Compassion Beat San Antonio. And it's this beautiful video with a gold cloth with this little girl's hands stringing these beads. And she includes a prayer with that. Now, the rest of the story is that she had two heroes. One was the Dalai Lama, and the other, who she shared a birthday with, not year with, birthday, was Desmond Tutu. And so I called her up because I was hosting the Dalai Lama. And I said, listen, I'm hosting the Dalai Lama. I want you to come to Stanford. I want to introduce you to him. And she said, I'm so sorry. I have very little money. I can't afford it. So I said, well, look, I'm going to hire you as a consultant. So you're coming here, bring a bunch of beads with you, and it'll all work out. So she came and she got to meet the Dalai Lama, and she brought a ton of beads, and we had him bless them all. And it was really quite beautiful. So then, a few years later, as I mentioned, I was friends with Tutu. I was at his 80th birthday party in Cape Town, and his wife's actually. And so he sent me a note, and he said, I want to invite you to my 85th birthday. And so I had been speaking, and in fact, I was in Oslo. And I decided I didn't want to, I'd already been trekking for a couple of weeks, and I didn't want to fly all the way down to Cape Town. So I called her up, and I said, you have to do me a favor. I said, I need you to represent me at Tutu's birthday. Okay. So I said, I'm going to pay your way. I'm going to pay everything. You go say hello to Tutu for me. So she did. And so obviously that had a huge impact on her life. And for myself, yes, it costs money, but that did not change my life whatsoever. But that simple act is something we can all do for another person. Is one, give the gift of ourselves, and understand by doing so, you can profoundly affect the life of another person. So her and I have actually remained friends. And in fact, have any of you attended the Council of the Parliament of the World's Religions? So it's an event that happens every 3 to 5 years now, and it's a gathering of typically about 10,000 people, all faith denominations, and they hang out together. Now, unfortunately, we haven't seen any right-wing evangelical nationalists there, but regardless, most people hang out there who believe that fundamentally all religions lead to home. And so I actually ran into her there, and of course it was a great reconnecting, but it is this power that each of us possess, to change the lives of other people. And it's easy to get into this mindset that, well, I don't have resources, I don't have position, I don't have power, I don't have money, to justify doing nothing. But that isn't an excuse, because sometimes just smiling at another person, holding their hand, sharing a meal, being present with them, has the power to change a life. And I have to say, even in my own life, I've had people who have come up to me And they said, you know, you and I talked 5 years ago or something. I have zero recollection. But whatever it was, it affected them. And I am very honored sometimes to be in that position because it means I'm living up to what Ruth asked me to live up to, which, you know, often is the cliche, pay it forward, but we all can do that. And what's interesting is the Dalai Lama says, the only time it's okay to be selfish is when you're being compassionate to another person. And it's true not only in reality, but also on a neuroscience level, because when you're kind, when you're compassionate, when you care for another, it has a huge, huge positive effect on your own physiology. That is the position where we're made to be. Everything works better. How many of you have heard of the blue zones? Yeah, so the blue zones are these places where people typically live over a century. Now, I'm sure if you know about that, you will also be aware that there are a million Mediterranean diet books, right? Because that's what it's based on, which probably none of you follow. But that's okay. And the reason it's okay is because, well, that's important. It's not in any way the most important thing, nor is exercise, nor is being at your ideal body weight, nor is not smoking, nor is exercise. By far and away, the most important thing is to be compassionate, to have deep social connections, deep relationships. That is one of the greatest protectors of you and dramatically increases your longevity. Now, that's not to say not to do the others, but I'm just saying that's the most important thing, having these types of connections and relationships. You know, sometimes people ask me, what is my personal practice? Since I'm an atheist. It's interesting, before I tell you what that is, you know, being with all these spiritual and religious leaders, first of all, I've never had a single one ask me if I believe what they believe. I've never had a single one proselytize me. And the reason is because, you know, each of these religions or practices have their own traditions, or dogma, if you will. And if all spiritual leader understands that the dogma can be helpful for some people, but they live above the dogma, because they all believe the exact same thing, which is universal love, acceptance, non-judgment, compassion, caring for the other. And it's always funny because I've had people come up to me and they'll go, I don't understand how you can just walk up to and you're immediately friends with her, or with the Pope, or whoever it is. And because it's not about the dogma. These people can see your heart in a microsecond. And if you're at that same vibration, if you will, you're immediately embraced. And that's what's important. It's not about the dogma. It's who you are in your heart. And that's why, you know, sometimes you see quote unquote religious people and it's a cloak they're wearing, it's not their true selves. And when you're able to stand and be your true self and let that beauty out that each of us has, that's when you recognize how much power each of us has. You know, so many people look outward for affirmation. And it's unfortunate in the sense that so many in Western society view, quote unquote, success equals happiness, which is a manifestation of power, position, and money. And nothing could be further from the truth. The most important thing to happiness is being comfortable with yourself and having peace in your heart. And you're the only person who can give yourself that. On some level, people may sit there and say, well, God gives me this beauty. God has created me. Well, I would suggest to you that one, when you recognize that all of us are one, that the other is you, you realize that God is within you. And it's your ability, it's your choice to nurture yourself, to care for yourself, to love yourself. And when you do that, that changes the energy that you give out to others. And by doing so, that decreases their fear and allows them to be authentic. And that's the problem in modern society. So many people feel they're going to be judged by other people and are afraid to show their true selves. And this is this issue with the blue zones. You see, these are people who they grow up in the same village, they have multi-generational families, everyone knows them, and they accept them for who they are. In modern society, we're not connected to our relatives. Oftentimes, they don't live nearby, our siblings, even people we've grown up with. So we're always concerned how they're going to look at us. But the interesting thing is, we all want to be our true selves. We all want to be loved for who we are and not carry this baggage of trying to appear perfect. And this is one of the problems with influencers. Have you seen, they go around, their hair's perfect, their makeup's perfect, they look like they have a perfect life. And the sad thing is, so many of them are suffering because they're trying to be something that they're not, because they think that that will lead to their acceptance by others. Again, this is outside desire for affirmation. And sadly, one, this is why you see so many of these people horribly unhappy and some commit suicide. Two, the sad thing is people listen to them, children especially, and they say, well, I'm not cool unless I'm part of the great crowd, or I dress a certain way. And, I think that's really, really a challenge for all of us. Sometimes I give talks, and I'll be telling a story about something that's quite moving to me, and I'll shed a tear, and my voice will crack. And I don't care. And the thing is, when I do that, that gives permission for everyone in the audience to connect with themselves. And oftentimes, everyone will start crying. Because that's where we want to be. That's where our heart center is. That's where love is. That's where all the best of ourselves sit. I remember I gave a talk one time to about 250 people, and again, my voice cracked, or I was very moved. And a woman comes up to me after and says, oh, I was so moved by that. Could I give you a hug? So I said, sure. So I hugged her, and I ended up hugging 250 people. But this is the power of feelings, being authentic, caring for other people. And I'll tell you another interesting story, and then I'll tell you about my practice. I know I'm remembering that. I gave one of these talks one time, and a woman comes up to me, and she says, my goodness, I felt so sorry for you. And I said, why? And she says, well, you were shedding a tear, your voice cracked. And she goes, weren't you embarrassed? And I'm like, and she said, listen, I'm a psychiatrist and a hypnotherapist. And if you come to me for 3 sessions, I'll get rid of that for you. And so it shows you the massive disconnect, sadly, that this woman had, because the superpower is being authentic and being able to sit with yourself and not be embarrassed or ashamed of showing your true feelings. So I'll end by I could read something if you want, but you can decide that in a minute. I'll end by telling you my own personal practice. So now I'm not going to say I do this 100% of the time, because some people say, that's not possible, which is probably true. In fact, Deepak Chopra, do you guys know him? So Deepak's a friend of mine, and his son did a film about him. Did any of you see the film? Well, he followed his father around for a period, and he's a meditator and all this. Well, he had a TV crew with him, right? So they start pounding on his father's door at like 5:30 in the morning when he's supposed to be meditating, and he's like laying out, like completely like this, snoring. And so it's not 100%. But anyway, my practice generally every morning is to sit at the side of my bed, to do a breathing exercise for a minute or two, and then think of the awe and joy it is to be in this world, and then to go through the 10 letters of the alphabet. And those are, and again, this is with intention, is compassion for self and others, recognizing the dignity of every person, practicing equanimity. You know, so many of us get lost on trying to hold on to those things that we think make us feel good. You know, you get an award or you're recognized in some way. These are all transitory. But the thing is, what's also transitory are the downtimes in our lives where we feel like we're suffering, we're being punished. Yet, if you reflect on it, where do you learn the most about who you are? It's during those downtimes. You understand the power you have within, you understand your resilience, you understand your ability to overcome hardship, and those are gifts. But again, they're also almost transitory, or almost always transitory. And what I mean by that then is not to get lost in either of these extremes, but to have an evenness of temperament in the way in which you see the world. And this is this saying from Viktor Frankl. Do any of you know Viktor Frankl? Man's life, man's search for meaning. And one of the quotes that is attributed to him, I say attributed because it's not actually been shown that he did that quote. Wayne Dyer did the quote, but regardless, it relates. Is between stimulus and response is a pause, and within that pause lies your freedom. And in some ways, this is analogous in that, you know, we can be reactive to something, but that's not always the way we wish to be, to immediately react, because oftentimes we haven't thought it through. So when you're able to pause for a minute and reflect, it often temporizes those sudden anger or hostility. Like I'm sure all of you have been cut off the road by somebody who was speeding or just wasn't paying attention. Has that ever happened to anybody? So for most men, I'm sure women would never do that, they usually use a 4-letter expletive, maybe a 2-word, or a hand sign. But it shows you when that happens, you immediately react. But because you're sitting there thinking that person's selfish, they're not paying attention, why did they do that? They're interested in themselves, right? But if we do a little thought exercise, and I said to you, well, the person driving the car is the husband of the woman in the passenger seat who's 8 months pregnant, whose water's broken, she's bleeding, and he's taking her to the hospital. That changes, right? So suddenly you should think, oh God, yeah, of course, let me help get you there. I understand how this could happen. But you see, it's our choice. We choose how to react, and we have the ability to choose how we react and not just react. And this is really a very, very powerful thing, because you see, for many of us, the baggage that we carry are the emotional responses to events, whether in our younger lives or even now. Because an event in and of itself is neither good nor bad. An event is the emotion we attach to it. And that is why forgiveness, our next letter, is incredibly important. To not get lost in those emotions. Of course, next is G, having gratitude. And that's a very, very powerful thing. You know, when you think that half of the world live on less than $2.50 a day, we're very, very blessed. Humility, and this is really hard for a neurosurgeon, understanding that you're no more important than anyone else. And you know, it's sad sometimes to see people who look down on others. I can always tell a good doctor because when he goes on rounds, he recognizes the importance of the nurses, the people who change the linen, the people who clean the bedpans, and he recognizes that the success of his job is dependent on these people. And so when we interact, it's never to ever look down on another person. I is for integrity or values that bound our behavior and define who we are. This is the walk in the walk. J is justice. And, being in a privileged position, we have a responsibility for caring for those who are vulnerable. K is for kindness, which has nothing to do with suffering, but simply recognizing another human being and honoring them with being nice to them. And of course, all of this is contained by love. So thank you for having me with you today. I appreciate it. Any questions? Questions? Oh, come on, there's one.